So we're going to take a brief 1-week break from our educational homilies on the Mass to focus on Tuesday's election. And before you shut your ears off because you're tired of hearing political ads and all the dysfunction that exists within our politics, this homily is not going to be about political candidates. It's going to be about the ballot initiatives that will be on your ballot when you go to vote. I'm sure that you've heard plenty about Measure 434 and 439 by now, but today I want to recap. I want to do three things. I want to recap what exactly is contained in the wording of the two ballot measures, and then I want to go through the practical aspects of how to vote pro-life in this election. And then third, I will leave you with just a couple of points of advice that you can take or leave, I suppose. But first, we'll start with the radical pro-abortion ballot measure. This is the wording. All persons shall have a fundamental right to abortion until fetal viability, or when needed to protect the life or health of the pregnant patient, without interference from the state or its political subdivisions. Fetal viability means the point in pregnancy when, in the professional judgment of the patient's treating healthcare practitioner, there is a significant likelihood of the fetus's sustained survival outside the uterus without the application of extraordinary medical measures. So that's a lot, and they're throwing a lot in there on purpose. Now, for someone who is pro-life, this sounds bad from the very beginning. It's talking about a constitutional right to abortion. But for somebody who feels that there is a limited need for abortion, that this proposal might sound reasonable. And the truth is, there's a lot of people who have that mindset. In fact, I would say most Americans feel that way. Abortion is probably far more popular across the country than you realize, especially with young people. I kind of smile when I see that the news channels are all talking about polls in a very close presidential race, but I'm a teacher and I've taught for 15 years, so basically the entirety of the Gen Z generation, and I know their values and the things that they hold pretty important, and they don't participate in polls, first of all, and they love abortion. So don't be surprised if they turn out to vote what the results will be. So something like this proposed constitutional amendment is going to sound very appealing to a lot of people. But what many of them don't realize is that this isn't a proposition that will sort of limit abortion to a reasonable extent in their minds. It is a radical proposition. The language is purposely vague and it's purposely deceptive. So we're going to take a look at the exact wording and what it really means. So the first two words are concerning. It says, all persons. Now notice that it doesn't say women, it says all persons. And the reason they purposely use that language is that so they can, so that any girl, any minor under the age of 18 could access abortion without their parents' knowledge. And this could also be a way for fathers of these unborn children to force women into abortion, or perhaps even the pregnant woman's family into having the deciding power to have an abortion as well. So it's kind of funny how quickly a woman's right to choose becomes somebody else's choice forced upon her. Removing parental involvement in a child's life is also a sex trafficker's dream. When you remove a child from the authority and the supervision and the protection of their parents, predators will jump in to fill that space. They will see it as an opportunity. And this makes children extremely vulnerable to abuse, to manipulation, and to exploitation. The next few words. So, all persons shall have a fundamental right to abortion. So when you use words like fundamental right, this is no longer talking about legislation. It's no longer talking about a law, because if it's a fundamental right, that puts abortion into the same category as civil rights. So if abortion were a fundamental right of every human being, then that would mean that being against abortion, being pro-life, would mean being against basic human rights. And that means that in the eyes of the Nebraska Constitution, being opposed to abortion would be the equivalent of advocating for slavery or racism. If something is a fundamental right, by definition, it can't be opposed. Let's read on further. All persons shall have a fundamental right to abortion until fetal viability. So this brings up a good question. Well, what does fetal viability mean? Who determines what fetal viability means? And it's good that you ask because Measure 439 explains it for us. It says, fetal viability means the point in pregnancy when in the professional judgment of the patient's treating healthcare practitioner. I'm going to pause there because guess what? When you get an abortion, you don't go to an OBGYN. You go to an abortionist. And since in Nebraska there are no doctors who are willing to murder and dismember unborn children, well, they come in from other states. There is no patient-doctor relationship. You make an appointment, you get the abortion, and then you leave. The abortionist comes to Nebraska for a few days every month, they do their killing, and then they leave. And so this proposed amendment intentionally uses vague words, quote, healthcare practitioner. It doesn't even say the word doctor. And the reason is because in these cases, it would be the abortionist who decides if the baby is viable or not. And if you make your money killing babies, well, you're probably going to find a reason to declare this baby to be unviable. The amendment goes on to explain fetal viability a little bit further. It says, fetal viability means the point in pregnancy when there is a significant likelihood of the fetus's sustained survival outside the uterus without the application of extraordinary medical measures. So extraordinary medical measures is a very specific medical term. What counts as extraordinary medical measures? Well, basically, any service that's offered in the NICU. If your baby had to be put on oxygen or spent any extra time in the hospital after they were born, that counts as an extraordinary medical measure. Basically, any treatment that requires a medical device, such as an incubator, counts as an extraordinary measure. And I was born 5 weeks early, so by this definition, I was not a viable child when I was born. The only reason that this language is added to this amendment is to make it sound like it puts a lot of restrictions on abortion and when it can take place. But in reality, it does none of that. The only reason, the only purpose for this wording of this sentence is to deceive the voter. Let's look at the final words of the ballot initiative. All persons shall have a fundamental right to abortion until fetal viability or when needed to protect the life or health of the pregnant patient. And here's the important part, without interference from the state or its political subdivisions. So the reason that this language is included in the ballot measure is because in Nebraska, efforts over the last 50 years have been made to provide greater protection for the unborn and for their mothers and their families. So I'm just going to go through a list. It's not all of them, but some of the pro-life legislation that has been passed in the last 50 years. 1991, the Parental Notification Act requires that at least one parent to be notified before an abortion can be performed on a minor 17 years or younger. 1993, Informed Consent Act requires education to be provided to a person seeking an abortion on fetal development, as well as information on public and private agencies and services available to assist a person through pregnancy, upon childbirth, and while the child is dependent. The 1997 ban on partial birth abortion bans the abortion procedure in which the person performing the abortion partially delivers a living unborn child before killing the unborn child. They usually do that by crushing the skull and completing the delivery. 2009, mother's right to see her unborn child ultrasound law ensures that a woman about to undergo an abortion has informed consent about the procedure. It stipulates the abortion facility must display the ultrasound screen to the woman, allowing her to determine whether or not she wants to see the screen. 2010 Pain-Capable Unborn Child Protection Act prohibits abortion after 20 weeks gestation except to preserve the life of the mother. 2011 ban on webcam abortions, which requires every abortion to be done by a licensed physician who is physically present in the same room as the pregnant woman or girl, whereas webcam abortions, which are done online, does not require a physician to be present at the time a chemical abortion is initiated. 2011 Parental Consent Act requires minors to provide notarized proof of consent from at least one parent or legal guardian before an abortion can be performed. 2018 Ending Taxpayer Funding of Abortion ensures that state Title X funding would not be available to those agencies who provided and referred for abortion services. 2019 Abortion Pill Reversal Act requires doctors to direct women to information on how to reverse the abortion pill for those who may change their mind and want to continue their pregnancy. 2019 ban on dismemberment abortion bans the use of an abortion process known as dilation and evacuation. This procedure involves slowly dilating a woman's cervix and then removing the unborn baby through dismemberment, limb by limb. And finally, we have the 2023 Preborn Child Protection Act, which offers protections to children at 12 weeks gestation in the state of Nebraska. Now, keep in mind that Nebraska still allows abortion even after 12 weeks in cases of rape, incest, or to save the mother's life. So when you hear proponents of Measure 439 talk about women dying because they can't get to an abortionist, that simply isn't true. Now, this is beside the fact that an abortion is almost never necessary to save a woman's life. So yes, sometimes to save a woman's life, a baby has to be delivered so early that the likelihood of survival is 0. Yes, sometimes a woman has to make a decision to take certain life-saving medications or treatments at the risk of her unborn child. And yes, an unborn baby is lost during an ectopic pregnancy, but none of those procedures are abortions. An abortion is a specific medical procedure where the child is intentionally and deliberately and directly killed by an abortionist. It is a specific procedure that has a specific desired outcome, the termination of a pregnancy and the termination of a life. And all the other treatments that I just mentioned, they don't have the termination of the pregnancy as the goal of the procedure. It's just a side effect, in some cases, unrelated to abortion. If this proposed ballot initiative becomes the Nebraska state constitution, part of it, every law that I just went through goes away. It's done with immediately because there's, quote, no interference from the state or its institutions, including things like health inspectors. So 50 years of common sense protections for women and girls against unsafe abortion practices would be eliminated. And you might think that I'm speaking hyperbole, but Michigan and several other states recently passed a similar initiative. Immediately, all of these regulations went away, including regular health and safety inspections. Because you see, if abortion is a fundamental right, you can't put anything in the way of that right from being exercised. So Measure 439 seeks to embed late pregnancy abortion into the state constitution, despite evidence showing that it is highly risky for women to undergo such procedures. And it uses terms like viability, that it can be manipulated by abortionists, and these definitions are so broad that even babies who require basic care are considered unviable. Nebraska law already allows first trimester abortion in it, and it provides exceptions for rape, incest, and life of the mother, which is supported by most people who are even in support of abortion. The proponents of Measure 439 are out-of-state political lobbyists. They were paid for by Planned Parenthood, by groups in Washington, D.C. They don't care about their state. They've already left our state. They did their job. They got the thing on the ballot. And so that's 439. Now we can talk about the other ballot initiative, and this is Measure 434. So here's the wording of this one. Except when a woman seeks an abortion made necessary by the medical emergency, or when the pregnancy results from sexual assault or incest, unborn children shall be protected from abortion in the second and third trimesters. So this ballot measure is not perfect, it's not entirely pro-life, but it is in line with the majority of what Nebraskans actually believed. And it isn't a radical pro-abortion bill that it's funded by Planned Parenthood, it's funded by people from our state. And this proposed amendment, it does 3 things. Number 1, it establishes protection for the unborn in at least the second and third trimesters into the state constitution, which would be a first for the entire country, I believe. Number 2, it supports and protects pro-life laws that are already in place in our state. And number 3, it establishes a ceiling on abortion. It can go no further than this, but it doesn't establish a floor, meaning that in the future there is room to limit it even further, all the way until one day being able to protect life from the moment it begins. Now, personally speaking, voting for something that makes exceptions for the sanctity of life leaves a bad taste in my mouth. My dad was adopted. He could have been born out of rape or incest. But legal scholars and medical ethics scholars who are a lot smarter than I am have assured me that this is, even though this ballot measure isn't perfect, it is morally permissible and encouraged to vote for this one. It is the best way of protecting preventing the catastrophe of the pro-abortion Measure 439. And all of the Nebraska bishops have agreed on that point, that it is not only permissible, but extremely important to vote for measure number 434. So those are the two ballot measures. Now let's talk about practicalities. So what will this look like on my ballot, and how do I vote? There are some sheets as you go into church on the stands. This is kind of a sample of what the ballot measures look like. And the first thing that you'll notice is that the abortion initiatives are just 2 of 6 that will appear on your ballot. So don't be surprised when there's a whole bunch of extra ones. There's 434 through 439, not just those 2. The radical abortion one is 439. It's the last one here. It's the longest of all of them. And when you're voting, something that's very important, ballot initiatives don't work the same way that voting for a candidate does. You're not voting for one or the other. You vote for or against each one. And so you want to vote for the pro-life one and against the radical abortion one. And the reason that voting for both is really important and is being strongly encouraged is that it's entirely possible that both ballot measures receive the necessary votes, which is ridiculously, to change the Constitution, only 50%. So both ballot initiatives can pass. And then it comes down to which one has the most votes. Because since they're completely opposed to each other, they can't both be in the Constitution. And so it comes down to whichever one has the most votes. So that's why we need to vote for 2. Basically, leaving one blank is like voting for the other one, is to vote for the opposite measure. There's more information available in the back of the church. One very handy thing that we have are little business cards that you can take with you into the voting booth. On the one side, it says which one to vote for. On the other one, it says which one to vote against. Makes it really simple. Let's see. The Catechism of the Catholic Church, which is the official teachings of the Church, it says that it is the duty of citizens to contribute along with the civil authorities to the good of society in a spirit of truth, justice, solidarity, and freedom. So in this case, we're not talking about voting for some guy in Washington, D.C. We're talking about voting on the right to live. There's all kinds of national and international issues that you can't control. But the most important vote you can cast is at the state level and the local level, because those will have the biggest impacts on your lives. They will have the biggest impacts on you personally. So even if you have no desire to vote for a candidate, which I don't blame you, you ought to be voting on issues like this one. It's your duty as a Catholic. You can't watch Fox News or CNN and complain and moan about the state of our world if we don't do anything about it. If you don't inform yourself, we're not just part of the problem, we're complicit in the problem. Now, the final thing that I want to do in this homily is to give you a few words of advice, 3 to be exact, but I'm not trying to sound smarter than anybody, but it's just practical advice that I've followed in my life, and I found it to be very beneficial. And I've had many people in recent years talking to me about how worried they are about the future. I've heard people say that if Donald Trump doesn't win, there's going to be a war, and I've heard people say that if Kamala Harris doesn't win, it's going to be the end of democracy. And I've heard people say that this is the end of times, and it's matching up perfectly what the Bible says about the end of the world. Which leads me to my first piece of advice. With any YouTube video you watch, or with any news channel you tune into, their goal is to make money. They don't care about you, really. Their purpose has nothing to do with your well-being. YouTube and cable news only makes money if you keep coming back to watch again. And if people say, hey, chill out, things are going to be okay, you're probably not going to keep going back to them, right? But if you believe people when they tell you that the world is ending, and if you believe people when they tell you that the fate of the nation hinges on this election, which I'm sure they say every single time, you're probably going to be more willing to go back to be a part of the money-making machine that the media has become. So 7 years ago, I unplugged from talk radio, from cable news, and political YouTube channels, and I really enjoyed that stuff back then. But I can say now that I'm much, much better for it. I'm much less anxious than I was 7 years ago. And everybody that has ever taken me up on that piece of advice has come to me years later and thanked me for it. They say it was the best thing they've ever done. And the reason why is because human beings are not designed to worry about things that are completely out of our control. Here's one of my favorite quotes from the great Christian author C.S. Lewis. He says, "It is one of the evils of rapid diffusion of news that the sorrows of all the world come to us every morning. I think each village was meant to feel pity for its own sick and poor whom it can help, and I doubt if it is the duty of any private person to fix his mind on the ills which he cannot help. This may even become an escape from the works of charity that we really can do to those we know. A great many people do now seem to think that the mere state of being worried is in itself meritorious. I don't think that it is. We must, if it so happens, give our lives for others, but even while we're doing it, I think we're meant to enjoy our Lord, and in him our friends, our food, our sleep, your jokes, and the bird's song and the frosty sunrise." That's some pretty good advice. Let me summarize. It was a long quote. I doubt it is the duty of any private person to fix their mind on which they cannot help. Instead, focus on our Lord, our friends, our food, our sleep, our jokes, the bird's song, and the frosty sunrise. My second tidbit of advice is this. Instead of worrying about politicians and what they say and think, worry about educating people in your own life, especially your own children. Like I said, many young people, they love abortion, and the reason they do is because they've been trained their entire lives that abortion is a matter of civil rights and freedom, and that didn't happen by accident. Parents had willingly surrendered teaching their children about sexuality, and so to fill in the gaps, they have Taylor Swift and TikTok to be informed with. They've done it for them. Kids are born with a phone in their hand telling them that abortion is a right. Last week when we had such nice weather, I had the windows open, and as school was getting out, a group of girls were walking down the sidewalk, and I overheard them talking about abortion and how a woman should have the ability to choose. They couldn't have been older than 10 or 11 years old. These are children. They're not radicals from California or New York. They're your children. And so rather than complain about politics, we should educate them, because if we don't, the politics won't even matter in the future. Now, my final piece of advice is this. This is one of the more silly aspects of it. People have been trying to predict the end of the world since the world began. 90% of the time, they were charlatans who were trying to sell you something. And so far, nobody has been right about the end of the world, not even Jesus, because when asked about the end of the world, about the end times, Jesus says, "Of that day and hour, no one knows, neither the angels of heaven, nor the Son, but the Father alone, nor the Son." Even Jesus doesn't know when he will be returning. And believe it or not, Donald Trump is not mentioned in the Bible. And Kamala Harris sure isn't either. If you think that God's plan is going to be completely destroyed by a single election in a single country in a single year, then your opinion of political candidates probably needs to be tempered a bit. History does not revolve around the 2024 U.S. election. It doesn't even revolve around the U.S. We're sort of just a flash in the pan. History revolves around the Almighty God. So based on odds, these are most likely not the end times and not worth panicking about. And they're certainly not the most trying times. We live mostly in comfort. Ask your grandparents what living through the Depression was like. My grandfather would never talk about it. It was so bad. read your history, and you'll find that really, this is nothing compared to what has come before. From the year 64 AD to the year 318 AD, 254 years, it was illegal to be a Christian. That's longer than the United States has been around. Hundreds died for simply saying that they believed. So we've only got to do this for like 3 more days. But until then, take a deep breath, have peace in the Lord, change the things that you can change, and leave the rest up to Him.